Hi, and welcome to Noble Earth podcast. We are a collective of storytellers, dreamers, and optimistic doers, aiming to share stories that help us remember the true wonder of being alive. Our aim with this podcast is to explore and share the transformational power of stories, to connect the dots, build bridges, and help one another find common ground in this time of great turmoil and intense divides. Under this mission, we'll be diving into a wide variety of topics alongside wisdom keepers and field experts in areas ranging from ecology, alternative living, indigenous culture, and mind-body work, to geopolitics, cybersecurity, and global systems thinking. Imagine an ever-expanding life atlas filled with ideas, discoveries, exploration, and inspiration. If that sounds like a space you'd enjoy hanging around in, then welcome to Noble Earth Podcast. We're glad to have you with us, and we hope you enjoy this episode.
And we're back again. So today, just to start us off, this will be an introductory podcast where we're going to go through the why, the tenets of the organization.
The North Stars.
The North Star of Noble Earth. And after that, we're going to have a bit of a debrief where we'll be talking about the experience in the UK from the protest. And we're just going to share some thoughts and takeaways from there. So
what we learned and what we experienced.
That's it. So I'm going to start you off because I know you have a few notes regarding why. Because obviously this was a bit of a kind of out of the blue project that I threw at your doorstep. So what is it about it that captivated you or that made you want to join in and become part of it?
So I can explain it in my points. But first, I will read something that I wrote because I think we were speaking earlier before we were recording about how we can speak directly and non-directly. And my brain works more indirectly in communication. So I wrote a why that's more indirect. And then I will go to the more concrete points. So they say that words are just words, but it's called spelling for a reason. Remember that rosebuds bloom only when they're in season, and that power in the hands of pain-ridden minds leads to dangerous distortion of truth and of time. Yet that the journey of return is always within reach, and that action speaks louder than whatever you preach, and that dark storms call for roots of remembrance to grow deep, to shield from the winds of forgetting, and to keep watering the flowers of light in your heart, or else times of darkness will steadily take stock, the remedy to which is always nearby, through the actions we take and the words that we cry. So let your words cast spells of light and of ease, and your actions be as rooted as the ancient trees, in love and in truth and in camaraderie, so that one by one we can finally see the end of the world as we knew it has begun. Now it's up to us which threads will be spun for the weaving of our story and the crafting of our tale, in which words are not just words, and in which light will prevail, and in which rosebuds are loved through all of their stages, and no hearts are silenced or locked in cages, for loving who they love and speaking truth to power, because in this tale, the words are made of flowers, and people are free, and there are no lonely towers, just fields and fields of life-giving birth, to a tale of love, to a noble earth.
Wow.
So that's one of the North Stars that came from my heart.
I feel like that needs a little bit of dissecting. That was a lot. That was really good.
So indirectly, that somehow I feel that words are not just words, and that there's so much we can do with storytelling to really weave together reality. And I feel that intentionally doing so is somehow how I want to contribute to this world, because I see so much love and light and beauty and darkness and pain and fear. And by being conscious of what stories we pursue and place into the world, I feel like we can really, for me, stories are like a connective tissue of this planet and of this species. So by telling stories and showcasing how we can actually function together as a whole in ways that benefit all lives on this planet, that's how I want to contribute. So when you came with this project that's still being formulated, it felt really aligned with what I want to do on this planet. So that's why I'm here.
I really like that. That's very, very good. I don't have a poem to initiate my own either, but I really like what you said about using words and stories to spell out the new world or formulate the new world, because everything always begin with a story. No matter where we go, everything has that subjectivity of the story and the magic of the story, and moving those stories around is where everything is born from. Everything starts and begins with the inception of that story. So contributing by telling stories, but also taking existing stories and watering them and casting light on them in a way where they can become useful and they can become healthy, not just a cause for concern or unrest in people, but rather something that strengthens and uplifts. I think for myself, it was a lot about trying to create a counterbalance to a lot of the negativity that we see in a lot of the medias. So having optimism at the core of it. And as we've discussed before, you really diving into the idea of optimism and positivity as a very profound choice every day, and something to be aspired to, not something that is born out of anxiety or is a reflection of naivete or something, but rather something that's very empowering, something that holds the world together, recognition that every single moment you always have a choice between the way you perceive something as a challenge, a position. How do you engage with it? Do you engage with it with an open heart, or do you close down towards it? Do you fight it, or do you move with it? And trying to take that principle into storytelling, modern storytelling, and then see where that goes. Because you can do that within, of course, the realm of news, but there's also so many other places where we can start challenging the stories or taking the existing stories and maybe just shifting them a little bit to turn them from stories that enfeeble us and disempower us into something that can really lift us up. And in that process, almost like a literary archaeology, discover the stories that can lead us forward, figure out and piece together the elements that we need in order to have a noble earth, right? That's where the name kind of came from. Yeah.
And I remember when we had a conversation when you were presenting the idea, and then you mentioned stories as medicine. And I think that's also so powerful that it has become, the field of journalism, it's very much a machine, like an industry. And in that it has become formulated, and it's lost the why often. It's just like regurgitated and formulated and told because, you're doing your job. But actually, like, this concept of stories has so many different functions, and one of the things they can do is really be so healing. Because what do we do? Like, when something happens to us, we want to share it, and we have to share it, and we have to tell it and retell it, and that way we make sense of it and we understand it, and we can collectively then move on. And I think that's such a, again, like coming back to the connective tissue element of stories, that it also has this, it's like a way of layers of healing whatever trauma we will naturally experience, because life has so many elements to it, and naturally there will be beautiful things, naturally there will be horrible things, and stories is a way for us to make sense of whatever happened.
And it goes both for the individual and for the culture, right? And in this sense, culture very much becomes an embodiment or representation of the aggregate as a whole. You know, you have the people, but they're represented almost as a single entity within the culture. So the stories of the culture have a completely different impact on us than the stories of the individual. But obviously, the stories of the individual likewise also have an effect on the stories of the culture that we'll then choose to accept or reject, right? So there are multiple like vectors of attack here that we really want to explore. I think that's going to be one of the more interesting parts of it.
Yeah.
Because you really see with especially like you said, when you go through a process, also as a culture, traumatic or otherwise, there's such a need for a shared story of it. We've seen that in 2020 to 2022 and such. But also surrounding, you know, conflicts, wars, politics, whatever it might be, there's a need to have some sort of shared understanding of it. And nowadays, one of the bigger problems with politics is not just that we have bad politicians, it's also that we can't even agree on what happened. Like back in the days, we couldn't agree on the solutions to what happened, but we agreed on what happened. But nowadays, even that is contentious. And there has to be a way to tell those stories that make them more appealing across the board and across the political spectrum. Because right now it seems like people are being spoon-fed narratives or stories that are very palatable to where they're coming from. But they're also, as a result of that, incredibly skewered or angled. And there's got to be a way to share these stories and tell these stories in a way where we can actually agree on some concept of what actually went down and what is occurring. But that's the process of trying to find those. They have to be beneficial to everybody, right? Because if someone loses from accepting a story, they're going to reject it naturally. The story has to be based in truth, but as with all stories, there's a large element of subjectivity to it. There's emotional layers, and there's all the sort of subtler forces that impact how we make decisions and how we perceive. And as soon as we dive into that realm, everything becomes negotiable to some extent. People are going to be able to like step back or engage with it in a positive way according to their own whims and wills. Yeah, I think that's what I got.
Yeah. And also what you were talking about there with being confused of what actually happened and all the narratives that are being pushed. I think it has a lot to do with, for example, social media and the algorithms and the way that we are consuming all these news as well. It has really created echo chambers and created such not only divide, but like a scattered news world. Sphere, yeah. And coming back to being aware of how we tell the stories, like just becoming really conscious of why are we telling this story, and selecting. You will naturally select frames. You have to select frames. You have to select like, this is how I'm looking at this. One way of approaching telling the stories is to include different frames and doing that transparency so that the reader is aware, like, okay, so we are looking at it from this perspective. There is also this perspective. There's also this perspective. And I guess trying to find what is actually at the root, because oftentimes now the problem or the issue approached in the story will often be placed on the other or another person or another people or another nation or another, but not necessarily looking at the systems that are actually causing the problem, and which is a problem for all parties involved, not only one side or the other, because this type of narration creates division, right? But then I think most of the time, it's like this in psychology, they have this couples therapy approach where you try to look at the problem, not as though the two people are arguing against each other. It's them together towards the issue. So finding ways of telling stories where instead of creating more of a divide between people that already exist, try to find like, okay, but how does this, like, how can we actually unite people against the true problem instead of making it surface level and making it seem as though it's people against people. Because imagine if we can collaborate, like we have a whole world of people that could actually unite if we can find underneath the stories, like what is actually the root cause and what is the thing that we can actually unite together to try to solve instead of arguing against each other.
Right. But I guess in that work, in that identifying the root cause or the cause behind the cause, there is an element of risk or subjectivity again. Like you engage the same problem, but like at a deeper level all of a sudden, right? Because then you can identify, it's societal systems or capitalism or whatever. And at the end of the day, how you view that, how you study that is in the same way. Yeah, and it's subject to criticism in the same way.
Yes.
I think for me, it's very much about deciding our line, not from a political point of view, but from a moral point of view, and making it very, very clear what the moral line is. And then from there, going into the stories.
Yes. It's like finding the shared core values that are human values, not rooted in political identity or religious identity or whatever identity, but actually just what are the core root values that we can all collectively agree upon.
Yeah. I like that. I think for why that's a good place to start. There was from my side of things, I guess one last thing I would like to add to it was this idea that wisdom is timeless. And like we've discussed before, you can use stories and news typically, right, as a very contemporary and very bombastic way of capturing attention and creating emotion and drive in people. But there's also something about diving back into older stories and also mythology and religion, but also stories that have been told for 50 years ago or maybe 30 years ago or whatever it might be, finding these stories or tales or legends or whatever they've become at this point and figuring out what it is that they can actually serve and like how they apply it in the modern landscape, right? Because it's not always helpful to solely focus on what is happening right now, because we're not trying to stay where we are right now. We're trying to move towards something, right? And if our nostalgic glasses or an idea of the past might be closer to that image that we're pursuing, there has to be some focus on it. Like you can't drive towards something without looking towards it, right? You're always going to veer in the direction of your attention. Going in and doing that exploratory work, right, for me is going to be a very interesting part of it.
I love that you bring up the perspectives, and we were speaking about it earlier about zooming in and zooming out, and that when we do the more current events stories, that's like the zooming in on this reality right here, and then it's so important to then also zoom out and look at the picture from a different angle, from a perspective, because then you remember that there is so much more everywhere around it that can also inform your view of the zoomed in version of reality. And there's this, I think it's from New Zealand, the Maori culture, that they always have a perspective of 3 generations forward and 3 generations back. So when you take decisions, okay, how, if I ask my great-great-grandfather and if I ask my great-great-grandchild, how would this decision impact them? And it's such a beautiful way to root into, yes, this timeline, but also all the ones before and all the ones that are coming. Because it really shifts how you think about life and, what's happening right now.
Yeah. Without going on a tangent on it, I heard someone suggest a monetary system once that was essentially a dual monetary system where there's current money and future money. And you'd have some sort of currency exchange rate between them, right? So the value would go up depending on, like if there's too much of one, the value of the other would go up accordingly, right? Proportionally to that. And to earn the future money, for instance, you'd have to do things that had value in the future, but not now. To earn the current money, you'd have to have things that have value right now. So it's almost like an expanded form of capitalism that has been twisted in a way where it serves a higher purpose, right? Because of course, you need to serve the people around you, but you also need to serve their grandchildren. And yeah, we tend to forget that because we get very caught up. I think do you have more you want to touch on this?
When we were speaking earlier about the values and where stories are told from, I think that's so important, and I think that's what I feel might be lacking in the mainstream and in journalism as a field, is that it's, like I said earlier, it's just become like this machine, and then you lost the point of like, why are we doing this? And coming back again to like, if you're telling stories from core values of love and of humanity and of wanting truly the best for all of life on this planet, then like all the stories can take so many different shapes, and finding ways of just constantly staying grounded in that, regardless of like, okay, you would go to an event and we see what happens and it's really like wild and crazy, and maybe you get a bit drawn into the politics of things, but then coming back to like remembering, why are we actually here? Why does this story matter in a long term? What is the true thing here?
Right.
I think that's another thing that I see, like Noble Earth being like the kind of core or the glue of the whole thing, that it's actually just finding ways of bringing each other back into remembrance of what actually matters in life through so many different avenues. But that's like the core, like, you know, when you're in a festival or in a city and you're lost and then you find your friend again and you're like, oh, wow. And first you felt so lost, and then you're just back and you're like, okay, everything is focused, everything is clear. We know why we're here, we know what we're doing. I guess that's why I see also just stories as a way of bringing us all back to remembrance of what truly matters.
Yeah, and that in a very real way, that is the intention of the whole initiative, right? That because everybody can go out, point a camera at whatever they see around them and get super distracted by reality and get caught up in things. The idea of having this platform or this structure underneath is really like to remind over and over and over again, and have that kind of serve as a guidance and help, so that we don't get lost too much in it. As I know, some was a good segue, but like something we experienced, both of us, when we went to the UK to the protest. It's very easy to get caught up in the moment. It's very easy to get caught up in other people's emotions. It's very easy to feel like you have to play a part in it without really finding your own part in it first, just because it seems like everybody is playing a part and everything is so volatile. Everything is like full of energy. Under those circumstances, it can be very helpful to sit down, quiet down on the inside, figure out, why am I actually here right now? Because maybe you're not here to yell at the police. Maybe there's plenty of people doing that. Maybe it's okay that you're walking around quietly. That doesn't make you unsupportive of the cause. It doesn't make you anything. It's just, that's the role you're taking right now. And taking a role consciously, as opposed to getting pulled in by the crowd or the commotion.
And I think there's also something to be said about also allowing yourself to be swayed with emotion, because through that, it also brings a lot of empathy, because if you allow yourself to fully be in a moment and experience what that experience is, then you can also understand the people, what they're going through, how it feels like. And I think there's something to, like, again, zooming in and zooming out, like both fully being there and experiencing everything, then taking a step back and being like, what just happened? And coming back to remembrance again. I think there's something to do with this dance that's really beautiful, because then you're both fully there, fully experiencing what life is actually offering in that moment, and then coming back to this core remembrance of like, okay, but what are we actually here for?
Yeah, we came with a purpose, right?
Yeah.
And what is that purpose? And continuing to choose that purpose. Like when we choose to engage with the story and choose to go somewhere, there is like some level of premeditation to that. There's an intention, and there is a perspective. There's an act of service that we want to do. Sometimes it's very exploratory, and sometimes it's more about covering something that we are aware of going on. But regardless of what it is, it's very important to know that and like constantly cleave to that. Because on a battlefield like that, it's just so easy to get caught up. And I think it's the same in life. It's very easy to all of a sudden be playing or dancing to the tune of everything around you because there's so much resonance, as opposed to sitting down and piecing together what it is that you want to do, or what is it that you're meant to be doing in this moment, and just working towards that in whatever shape or form it might take.
There's a Swedish writer who writes, or singer who writes really poetic lyrics, and he wrote something that I can translate, but it's not really the same. But it's just, isn't it beautiful to rediscover life where I left it? And it's something similar, but the opposite. So like, you forget, you get lost, you fall into whatever thing, and then you come back and you're like, oh wow. And it's actually, there's something beautiful in the forgetting, because then when you come back to remembrance of why you're truly here and your purpose and everything, it's even richer. Mm-hmm. And every time we come back, because we forgot, I feel for myself, it gets deeper. Like the remembrance get deeper, and you can stay for longer in the remembrance. But it's also, the point is also to get lost, to then come back, and maybe one day we'll stay fully in remembrance.
maybe the point of being incarnated like this is that you're
to
meant
forget
to,
and remember.
to take these breaths in and out and forget and remember. There's something very symbolic and very iconic. It's a pattern that we see above. It's a pattern we see in the microcosm and the macrocosm. It's expansion and contraction. And,
a heart beating.
It's a heart beating. And in a weird way, that is how we work as human beings. That is how we learn as souls. That is how we, maybe even a single incarnation can be seen as that. You're just going in, then you're going out. And next time you're going to go in and you go out. Some people would argue. But yeah, I want to go back to the debriefing, because I think we covered the why very well. I guess there's one more thing I would just do before that. It's something that I've heard online, and I think you did too. This idea that if you don't watch the news, you're uninformed. But if you watch the news, you're misinformed. And if you watch the news and you sort of perceive the motions and movements that is actually occurring, sort of the shadow plays on the wall, if you want to use Plato's analogy, then you just get depressed because you realize you're kind of trapped inside this theater, right? And that is really, take it back to positivity, right? That's where it comes in, because that's the final step towards emancipation, is that you then go from that state where you realize, okay, there is actually a lot of movement, there are a lot of players here, there's a lot of staged acts that I don't necessarily have the power to confront. But I have a choice in terms of how I contribute from here. And staying positive in that is such a powerful choice. And it is the choice that once accumulated through enough people can actually manifest itself into a noble earth, right? Or a better world. And without that, everything will always spiral towards entropy.
Yeah, and you can feel it in yourself. Like, if I reflect on the times when I'm in a state of fear, or in a state of anxiety, or in a state of feeling separated or jealous or in lack, and I think of the actions that I take, or the just the feeling that I'm in, and I compare that to the times when I feel totally relaxed, my shoulders are down, I'm filled with love, and the actions that I take from that state, and I look at how the world responds and how I'm feeling in my body, it's like night and day. And like you're saying, if we can come to that in ourselves, that is the biggest protection from the things that are happening around us, because then we can take actions that we truly want, not from perceived threats, or not from states of confusion. And like you're saying, holding that within you and sharing that onwards, whatever actions you take, that energy will spread. And then more and more people will also be able to find that place within them. And that is so empowering, even if it might seem like you're dissociating or you're oblivious to what's going on. You can see it in the people, many children in Gaza right now. They're dancing on top of their burnt down houses. And that is such a spirit of resilience, because that keeps them alive. That spirit of positivity and of hope and of love, that is what is keeping them alive throughout all of the struggles they're going through. And it's a source of immense power, because from that state you can actually be in the world without succumbing to the fear that is the systems or all the forces that are...
You always have the power of choosing your intention.
Yes.
Going back to the debrief from the UK, there was something we quickly talked about at some point when we were discussing it. But to explain it, we kind of have to just do a very brief brush up of what actually happened. I'm just going to go through it very quickly. So when we arrived, at first there was a surrounding of the area and people were a bit unsure. Then the initial arrest began and there was a lot of turmoil. In particular, in one part of the square was very, very loud shouts and drumming, and there was no violence, but it was very. We
heard
tense.
Some "Oi, Granny Snatcher!"
Yeah, there's a lot of cursing. Then, as the day went on, there was a little bit of a respite, followed by very intense arrests, where they just continued, and they were very expedient with it. Going in, pulling them out, going in, pulling them out. And they had
going in was like 12 police
12
officers
from like 8 different angles. So they were going constantly, just taking people out. But it took a long time.
And there were hundreds of police.
There were hundreds of police. Then after that, as the central crowd was getting smaller and smaller, everything started sort of consolidating in the middle. And that's where something really interesting happened, because at that moment, the participants stopped this agitated spirit of resistance, and they instead switched into a much more communal modality. They began singing together, they began lighting candles, they began sitting together and like stroking each other's hair, or like just sort of comforting each other in a moment of tension. There was a lot of cheering and just comforting for the people choosing to take this risk upon themselves of getting arrested. And in those last hours, there was a very profound experience of healing, because as you go through a protest like that, it is a full experience. You're so in it, like we talked about, you get caught up in the yelling, you get caught up in the emotions, you cry, you have all this stuff you want out. And then after that, you need the communal experience to almost consolidate yourself again, like to decompress. And the fact that it happened so organically there was just such a testament to how human of an experience it is, and the expression of like the human spirit this was, that it just organically reorganized itself into a structure or shape that nurtured and that healed and that comforted, while still maintaining a space for this frustration and anger and injustice that was occurring.
Yes. And now when you're saying that, you're reminding me of like going there and being there and experiencing it with them. I also realized what an alchemical process it was to be in a protest, and how it's actually, that's, for me, I can see that's the purpose it serves, apart from possibly making the political change or the social economic change that is being called for. Also on the personal level, how it allows for all the frustration and the stuckness and the stagnation that you feel at whatever problem you're protesting. It allows that energy to start moving and flowing through you, through this whole carousel and this whole journey of all the different emotions. And for me, I noticed after that something was released, and I was much more inspired, and I could sense like, okay, from this state, I can actually take action again. So it blocks, like whatever issue is the cause of the protest will probably have created a lot of stagnant energy. And then through the protest, it allows all of that to erupt and then to come down and then to slowly formalize itself differently in your body, so that you can take action.
Yeah, I like that a lot. Like this idea that the need to go protest is almost like a knot that needs to be released before you can take effective action. So the protest itself is not even necessarily the full action. That's just as much you come home, you talk to people about it, the way you carry yourself, the way you approach your daily life and the other events that you go to and the way you just participate in society. Of course, it has meaning that you go to the protest. It does. But it's such a cumulative effect when you see it not just as an attempt to change politics,
Yes.
but also as a way of moving, like you say, the stagnant energies so that we can afterwards become clear-headed enough to
Yes.
have real conversations about what is actually going on here without all this
Tension.
need to like throw something out or spit something at the other, right?
Yes.
Because that's all gone at that point.
Yes.
Now we can communicate. And it also makes sense then why as a society it's so important that we do and participate in this. Because if the society on the whole doesn't really engage in this type of politics, then all of a sudden when you sit down to have any reasonable political discourse, it's naturally going to run into these blockages, into these stagnant energies, and it's just never really going to be able to move then. That's, you know it from your personal relationships as well. Like then all of a sudden you get into that argument that you always land in because it's kind of right there in the middle of the road and you've never like fully removed the debris. So every time you get to that spot, you know, like that's where the conversation halts.
Yes,
You know?
that, or I mean, I think it's when we look at it, if we zoom out and we look at global social movements, they are just an expression like too much tension has built up and people are like, no more. Like what happened in Nepal, for example, is just like people ran into the streets because all of the emotion is just pushing them to do something really radical. But I think that's one way, that's people allowing the emotion to move through them. The other alternative, which happens very often, is that we just repress them. And then the result is depression. And depression is just like a numbing, total numbing, right? Or a dissociation that we're not going to acknowledge that anything is happening. So I think also that's another thing that happens in society when you just like push down. Like obviously, if we see photos from Gaza that has been coming out for 2 years, that will naturally make you so angry you want to punch something.
It demands an expression, right?
Exactly.
Yeah.
But I think for many people, another way of dealing with those difficult emotions is just to not feel them or not acknowledge them. And then that creates depression or dissociation, which doesn't make you an active participant.
No.
You know, like that will...
That's a very paralyzing or
Yes.
pacifying feeling to be carrying around. And the other instance that you mentioned as well, right, where you just overcorrect or you overcompensate for it in a way because all of a sudden you kind of lost touch with the reality. And like it's purely emotional at that point. And ultimately they're going to find themselves on the throne and they're still going to have to figure out how they want to piece their society together. And if they don't know how to have a good conversation about that, they're going to run into the same problems once more because we still don't know how. Hopefully it's going to be a bit of a better conversation because now some of the energy's out. But yeah, we'll have to see on that one.
Only time will tell.
But that's a very interesting take.
Another thing that I also felt or experienced from this was that this specific protest, but then also all the different protests and social unrest that is happening all around the world is just showing that there's a crumbling of the structures and the systems that have been in place for centuries. And as a collective, we're all experiencing this upheaval. And it's very, it raises a lot of energy. It can be anxious, it can be exciting, but it's raising a lot of energy all around the world. And something it made me realize is that through all the cracks that are occurring in the global systems, there will be, and there is already starting to be, power vacuums or vacuums. And these empty spaces can and will be filled with some form of energy. And that's why it's even more important that we stay grounded in the core values that we know to be true in our hearts, of love and of truth and of humanity, and to try to send that energy into the power vacuums, because forces that are operating on fear or on negativity will obviously also try to enter into these.
Yeah, and energy is always wrapped, again, to take it back, energy is wrapped in story, right? All energy and power vacuums, right? Or all energy that goes anywhere is wrapped in a story. So when you have the police, there's a story around why you have the police. When you have a school system, there's a story around the school system. When you have a lockdown, there's a story around the lockdown. And when you have new regulation from the government, there's always a presentation, right? So when we have these power vacuums, it's so important to figure out like what stories are going to fill these power vacuums. Now we have inflation. Okay, well, there's a story that is slowly changing about our relationship with money. So how do we get sound money, right? And why is the story of sound money, knowing that our currency is represented by some real tangible value or asset, why is that important? Well, because if you go completely away from that, then you end up with an economic system like the one we've seen kind of play out and now beginning to unravel, right? Where all of a sudden, you have inflation rates that people's salaries can't follow up on. And just in general, like people don't necessarily trust not just their own currency, but any currency. People don't really know where to put their money. Like it's always been that the petrol dollar, right? That was safe because that's how we traded in a raw resource. But even as time goes on, we're gonna move away from that resource, as well as as the faith in that system crumbles and as new collaborations create the potential for trading in this same material, raw oil, right? In different currencies potentially, then all of a sudden you can't necessarily be certain that your USDs are gonna have the value that they always did, right? So there's always a story wrapped around energy wherever we find it in the world. And the more energy that's there, the more important, more critical the story is. And here at Noble Earth, right, that is where our role comes in. That's where our job begins, to figure out, okay, so where are these cracks in the structures of our current world? Where is the energy going to move soon? And what stories do we need to construct in order to move us towards a better world, right?
Yes.
And ideally doing it in the open so that everybody
Yes.
knows what's going on. This should not be like a subtle thing done by a lodge of Freemasons or Illuminati or whatever, right? No, this is just us communicating to everybody about an idea, the value of that idea, where that idea could be fit in with, exactly, and how we would do it.
Mm-hmm.
And that's it.
Yes. There's a saying that truth is our commonly agreed upon. No, reality is our commonly agreed upon truths, and allowing more and more people to be part of the commons who are creating the truths.
Instead of being presented or subjected to a truth and then having to just take it in, right?
Yes.
Making people conscious co-creators of it. But that requires a deep level of insight into what is going on. At least on a narrative level, right?
Mm-hmm.
You don't necessarily need to know how a cryptocurrency operates or how international monetary systems operate on a daily basis, but you do need to have some sense of why do we use currencies, right? And what is value and how do we think about value and why is this system at the core of everything we do, right? But it's very doable to educate and teach people about these concepts. And once you have the concepts, that's when we can get creative about, okay, well, how about we restructure it like this? Because then you know which elements you need to have a functioning society as we understand things right now. But simultaneously, you can move a bit away from some of the very rigid manifestations or implementations of these ideas that we are living in right now.
Yes, and this is why it's actually a very crazy time to be alive, because there is so much movement which allows and flexibility which allows for the reconstruction, and more people are aware because of the interconnectedness and because of we have access to so much information, right? So I think more and more people are starting to question everything, which is such a powerful and scary and overwhelming but powerful time to be in.
Yeah, it's a fantastic time to be in if you want to participate in creating a better world, or if you have ideas for how to create a better world, or even if you just want to just get to learn more, right? Because this is the moment where what is the English expression of it? We usually say this is where we split cinnamon and dirt. There's an English, this is the moment where. Wow, there's got to be an English version of that. It's a very famous proverb. Anyways, this is where the curtain falls, right? And we're gonna find out, okay, which part of the systems are critical And as they crumble, we're going to see a lot of unrest. But also which part of the systems might not be so critical. And we're going to have to challenge that and actively go in and maybe deracinate some elements. Some of them maybe have to be pulled out for good. Some of them might have to be resewed or restructured somewhere else. But we have so many systems in place at this point that it's become crippling. There's this saying, like, I think we have 300 additional like addendums to our national regulations every year. And we've had that for like, that's been the case for like the last, I don't know, 30 years or whatever. And at some point, everything just starts calcify, right? Everything becomes so hardened. You can't really move within it anymore. And every single addendum is like, it's an attempt to create some desired effect. But as you just spill more and more and more of these onto the papers, at some point it starts having a very negative effect. And these side effects can be very hard to monitor and estimate preemptively. But now that we're looking back on it, we see, okay, actually, we might have to reorganize quite a lot of things right now, because at this point, it's not really giving us the results that we want. And we see that because society is not moving in the direction that we want. People are generally unsatisfied with the way things are being managed. And there has to be some level of accountability to that. And the only way you can have accountability to that is if you go in, you create a system where people are not just participants by voting once every 4 years, but where you make it very, very clear that the individual holds quite a lot of influence. Their vote is continuously counting in whatever decision is being made, right? And then the battlefield is going to be a battlefield of ideas, rather than as now we just have like a few months of campaigning, and then we'll see who wins. But once they get in, there's a bunch of structures that we never voted on, that we never consented to, which basically take a hold of them. And there's like donors, that's like massive corporations which have too much leverage over a country's regulatory decisions. And the only way to take the power back, so to speak, is by creating democratic systems or voting systems that continues to reinforce the story around how we run our world, how we structure our society. Because the story that we're currently living in, the story that our parents grew up believing in, that's crumbling because none of us see representation in any government. And you'll have to go very, very, very far. All the statistics say the same thing, right? That is the 60s, 70% at this point who's like deeply, deeply troubled and dissatisfied with their own government. Like, how does that work when you have a majority government?
And it's interesting because what you're saying now, it reminded me of this, you know how we always speak about finding balance, but it's not a static activity, it's an activity. So it has to be balancing. And that even, say, with religions, that oftentimes the people that brought forward their ideas were truly living embodiments of whatever values they were teaching and talking about and living. And then as soon as they become dogmas and as soon as they become these calcified structures, it loses the magic and the potency and the life within them. And what you're referring to with this a different way of political system where it's actually really active, it actually makes so much more sense because it's more comfortable and it sounds like a more comfortable and easy idea to just like create a system and then have it be there and then think about it like once every 4 years. But life happens in every single moment. And okay, what if there's, you make this decision today and then 1 week later, there's a huge flood that actually requires all the resources to go to this. Life happens like that. And so having, even if it maybe feels more uncomfortable, life is very alive and it happens in every moment. And finding ways of structuring our societies.
But take that into account.
Exactly. It will always happen. Like we're constantly in change. We're constantly becoming new in every single moment.
I like that. As things get dogmatic, things start to calcify, right? I think that's exactly where we go back to intention.
Yes.
Because the problem with dogma is that you have the prescription, but you don't have the intention anymore,
Yes.
right? So the way back from there is to figure out what is the actual intent of this. We know, people who study religious texts know this, right? Yeah, you can read some horrific passage from any religious text, and then some guru or priest or imam, they're going to look at it and say, well, you don't understand what it's actually about. And they'll explain or convey the intention. And then we can debate on whether or not that's the true intention. But the point is, dogma begins when our relationship with the intention fades. And that's what we need to bring back. We need to bring back our awareness about what is the intention of what we're doing right now. What's the intention of voting in this direction? What's the intention of running in this way, right? The intention is not just to do that thing that was said to be done. It's a moral question, right? It's representing an energy that needs representation within government. And how do we keep that in a world that's constantly changing? Well, we can only do that if we have a deeper relationship with the cause than we do with the concrete points of
Yes.
the debates, right?
Because then otherwise we become like robots. That's why systems, I guess, are where we often lose the human soul or the humanity when it becomes huge structures and huge systems, because when things become mechanical, that's when you forget. You just start doing things on repeat, and then you don't even realize that you're there, and then you wake up and you're like, oh wow, I'm here chopping this thing or whatever. It's like when you become so on autopilot, you lose track of who you are and what you're doing.
All of a sudden you find yourself arresting pensionists
Exactly.
at a
So I
rally.
guess
Okay.
finding ways of again coming back to remembrance is like the core tenet of all of this.
Right.
Unfortunately, our cameras died at this point, but we'll keep exploring the transformational power of stories in our next episode, where we will be speaking to a mind-body practitioner about how stories can be used intentionally to heal and help us thrive. We hope you'll join us for that as well.